Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Ana Seiferle Valencia, and I'm the Research and the Outreach Manager here at the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill. Our director, Ben Wilder, is traveling for field research, so I'm here this evening to introduce our presentation. This is the penultimate presentation in our series, and I want to thank our partners, the Friends of Tumamoc, El Crisol, Hotel Congress, and our speakers for participating in this series and making it so successful. And thank you to all of you. So I'm speaking to you from the Desert Laboratory on Tumamoc Hill. Tumamoc Hill is known as Atam as Tumamoc Doag, or Horned Lizard Mountain, on the ancestral lands of the Sobaipuri and Tahana Atam peoples. This volcanic hill is of prominent ancestral, cultural, and sacred significance to the Atam nations, including the Tahana Atam Nation, Gila River Indian Community, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, and the Akchin Indian Community, as well as the Hopi tribe and the Pasquayaqui tribe. The Desert Laboratory recognizes the cultural significance of Tumamoc Doag as the bedrock of our institution and our future actions. So without further ado, I'd like to now introduce Doug Smith of El Crisol, and Doug will introduce our speakers.
Everyone, and thank you, Ana. I hope you all have enjoyed the presentation so far and have learned some things along the way. We've had occasion to hear from scholars, researchers, and community leaders about the abundant historical and contemporary relationships between agave and especially human communities. But as the title of this session indicates, certain factors are in play maybe, such as climate change, habitat loss, the rapid growth of agave spirits industries that are beginning to impinge on those relationships because they pressure agave populations. They pressure their viability. The whole program here is called Agave Renaissance, but if agave is to undergo a kind of renaissance, we have to be careful and forward thinking about the stewardship of agave now, as well as of the ecosystems, the food webs, and the cultural traditions of which agave forms an important part. And so one other theme that this session will emphasize is the implications of agave conservation for many species, in particular migratory pollinators. And I can't think of three people better situated to discuss stewardship in the Borderlands than the women we are hearing from tonight. Francesca, Claverie, Valeria, Cañedo, and Leia Ibarra are scholars, researchers, and community leaders all at the same time. Through a partnership between Borderlands Restoration Network and Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, all three are collaborating on the cross-border Baccanora for Bats project, funded by a Connectivity Challenge grant from the Salazar Center for North American Conservation, a quite prestigious grant, but I'll allow them to describe that project as they go along their presentations. Specific introductions. Francesca Claverie, friend of mine, is the Native Plant Program Manager for Borderlands Restoration Network, which is headquartered in Patagonia, Arizona, just about an hour south of Tucson here. She's a border native from Calexico, where she grew up on an alfalfa farm. Her engagement with native plants began in college at UC Davis Arboretum. She's been in Patagonia since about 1913. You're not that old, are you? 2013. First as an intern on the Native Seed Search Conservation Farm there, whereupon she took over management of the Native Plant Nursery for Borderlands Restoration Network. So she's been the Native Plant Program Manager at BRN since 2013. I've had the pleasure to get to know her a bit through our common interest in agave, but also via my own participation in BRN. And she is definitely one of the engines that makes that organization the vital thing that it is. Valeria Cañedo and Leia Ibarra are part of Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, a group of young professionals, mainly biologists, dedicated to conservation. They started working back in 2015 as volunteers in conservation projects such as monarch butterfly conservation, wildlife monitoring, and spring assessment. In 2020, the Colectivo became an official organization under the name Centro de Colaboración para la Ciencia y Cultura, or CENCA, directed by leaders from different areas of expertise in science and the arts. CENCA functions as a platform for developing innovative projects and allows expansion into other areas, important areas of concern, like human rights, arts and cultural promotion, education, and professional training. So the way this is going to go this evening, I think we're going to do we're going to do the presentations in succession. So we'll start with Francesca, and then move to Valeria and Leah, and then we'll all get back together at the end or near the end for a Q&A session. So with that, let me turn it over to Francesca. Thanks everybody again for being here.
Thank you so much, Doug. We're so happy and so honored to be here and to share our work with you and to be a part of this entire Agave Renaissance project and festival and presentations. It's such a wonderful lineup. We've had the opportunity to go back and look at other videos. You can find all the videos online. And yes, this is just such a wonderful opportunity. We're very sad that David Suro can't be here, but we feel like he's here in spirit because he's been such an incredible collaborator and inspiration to all of the work that we're doing and have done. So without further ado, this presentation is Bats and Agaves, a Symbiosis Imperiled. And I want to introduce our organizations a little bit. Borderlands Restoration Network has been around. I think the original Borderlands Restoration L3C started work out of Patagonia in 2010, 2011. And there's three main components to our work. We do physical restoration, which is working with rock structures and bringing water back to the landscape. We have a strong education component where we fund youth and provide internships on both sides of the US-Mexico border. And I come to you from our native plant materials program, which works with hundreds of different species of native plants on all aspects of conservation and restoration, from a native plant nursery to seed collection. We have so many really fun projects. And this whole Agave for Bats project has been really wonderful and just a real passion of ours. We started working with the Colectivo Sonora Silvestre before they were an organization starting in 2017. And the work that they've done, you'll get to hear about tonight, but they are an impassioned and really motivated, inspirational group. And the kind of work that they're doing down in Sonora is the kind of work that we'd love to see all along the borderlands. And this kind of community-based binational conservation is so important to us. And we're just really, really passionate about it. So tonight's presentation, we're going to go through why agaves for bats. So really get into talking about bats as pollinators, which I think is important for understanding the whole ecological side to the symbiosis between agaves, bats, and humans. I'm going to go into tequila and ecology of what has happened and started happening with the whole agave spirit industry. And then Leah and Valeria are going to talk about the history of Baccanora and specifically the kind of Baccanora for bats work that they're doing in Sonora with their projects. So getting into agave distribution, and if you've been to any of the other talks, you've already heard a lot about agaves as plants. This is a distribution map of agave suitability across North America that Rodrigo Medellin had put onto the Conavio site. And you can kind of see the dark areas or where agaves are most suitable. There are about 210 different species of agaves. Their center of origin for the species is in central and southern Mexico, but you can see the dark patches going up into kind of the Sky Island region even, and in Arizona we have around 40 different species, and similarly in Sonora. For the most part, agaves, about 90% of the genus, only flower once and are monocarpic. We do have some species that will flower more than once in their life, but this is really, really important for both understanding their ecology and how they want to reproduce, and also how they interact with pollinators. These agave plants, this species is Agave Palmere, a species very near and dear to my heart. This is the most common species found in the between like 3,000 and 8,000 feet elevation. You'll find them in southern Arizona and northern Sonora. And they're just huge, beautiful agave plants. And as you can see, this agave has put all this energy over a decade or so into its base, stored up all these sugars, and then is pushing it forward to flower. On the right, you can see the flowering Palmere. On the left, you can see it just starting to sprout up. No surprise, these agaves are in the asparagus family. They took them out of Agavaceae and put them in Asparagaceae. Seems kind of obvious when you look at the stock. But this is what agaves want to do with their time and their life, is flower. This is their goal. Plants can't walk, so they really depend on pollinators. Pollination is how plants have sex. It's how plants move their genes around and increase genetic diversity and learn about environmental changes and evolve. This is an example with, bees, just to get into it, how bees are a common pollinator. There's many, many different kinds of pollinators in the world, from mammals, both flying mammals like bats, monkeys, lizards are good pollinators, butterflies, hummingbirds, bees. We have hundreds of different species of native bees in this part of the world. Wind is a pollinator. This is just an important base function of how plants are able to spread their genetics and communicate with one another. This is the agave. This is how agaves flower, and this is what agave flowers look like. And here you can see this is when their pollen is released. The ovaries then fertilized. They then turn into seeds. This little cycle is how you end up getting agave seeds. And for the most part, so many agaves do this through bats, via bats. And if you think about how flowers are interacting with their pollinators, it's so obvious that agaves are trying to flower for bats. They're just really putting it out there. They have these really tall stalks. The flowers reaching out, like their hands, their little flowering branches are extended so that the bats can come to them. And a lot of species like Agave Palmere is a great example, release most of their nectar at night, where they're really depending on getting these little flying mammals to come over to them. Here's what this is a lesser long-nosed bat pollinating saguaro cactus, and this is a wonderful example because you can really see how the agaves just really go for it and get their whole bodies and little heads into these flowers, and then are able to spread this pollen around to different plants. Here's what a little bat looks like, super stoked and full of pollen, and probably pretty well fed in this photo. And I want to take a moment to talk about bats specifically, because so much of the conservation and restoration work that we do is for bats. And as a person growing up who never really focused on animals, I've always been more of a plant nerd. Bats are fascinating and super diverse. And I hope, if anything, you can leave this presentation obviously being really stoked on agaves, but also being really passionate and caring about our little bat friends that are completely overlooked, partly because they come out for the most part at night and humans rarely see them. So the main things that we know about bats, they're mammals. They're the only mammals that fly. They use echolocation to navigate, and they're very, very diverse as far as mammals go. There are more than 1,300 species of bats in the world, which make up a quarter of all the planet's mammal species. That's a staggeringly large percentage of all mammals. So out of all, humans and elephants and horses and dogs and whales, and out of all the different mammal species, a quarter are bat species, which, I don't know. I feel like I could learn about bats for the rest of my life and always be amazed. This is one of the largest bats that are out there. It's like the size of a dog. There's also very, very tiny bats. Some look like, cute, big, like eyes with fruit-eating bats, and like these little funky bats. They're just incredibly, incredibly diverse group of animals. And the specific bat that we are interested in and that we are working to conserve is the nectar feeding bats. So of all of the bats in the world, close to 70%, 60 some percent are insect eaters. So there's around, similarly to how there's about 40 agaves in Arizona, there's a similar amount of bat diversity in Arizona. Most of those, except 2, are all insect eating bats. And here are the 3 nectar feeding bats that you find that even come into the United States. And so if you think about people living anywhere else in the United States, especially, for the most part, you're never going to encounter a nectar feeding bat. The nectar feeding bats are found in a tiny little section of southern Arizona, up into Tucson. Slightly north of Tucson is about as far as they go. A tiny little section of New Mexico, and small southern parts of Texas. They don't go into Florida. I don't know why. They just don't head over there. And so the 3 species that come into this area is the Mexican long-tongued bat, Chironicterus mexicana, which is a very mysterious little bat, partly because there just aren't many. It's not a, there aren't, it isn't a huge population of them. So you find them sometimes with the lesser long nose or with the greater long nose, but they're not super common. And then the lesser long-nosed bat is the bat that we work with that comes up into this part of the Southwest US, Northwestern Mexico. And then the greater long-nosed bat is the one found more on the east. So if you look at their distribution maps, here's what that kind of looks like, where all these circles are bat roosts, where they'll roost and have their babies and hang out. And then their ranges are, this brown area is where both Leptonicterus nivalis and the Leptonicterus yerbabuena both will be found. And then the Leptonicterus nivalis will head up on the east side, and they're the ones coming into Texas. Our bat, that's the yerbabuena, comes up on the west. And you can see that there's this little section of New Mexico where you can find both species, which they just figured out recently. So these lesser long-nosed bats are coming up the west coast of Mexico. They're pregnant for the most part. The only ones that come up they're mostly pregnant bats. And they think that maybe they're coming because as pregnant bats, they're looking for a certain maybe amino acid or nutrient found either in the saguaro flowers or in some of these flowering agaves that we have in this neck of the woods. So the whole time they're heading up northwest, they hug the coast, they're heading for the big saguaro cactus bloom. They hit that bloom, they have their roost that they hang out in, they have their babies. And then when they turn around in the late summers and start to head back throughout the fall to hit central Mexico again in the winter, they're then depending on all of these flowering agaves, all these Agave Palmere up in our mountains around our area, and then all these Agave angustifolia heading all the way south by the Sierra Madre Occidental. And all of this information that I just relayed, this is, we learned all of this through the work of Bat Conservation International, a wonderful organization that you should definitely check out. They have a great membership program. They send out a really fun Bats magazine, and they've been really, really supportive and instrumental in the Agave, the whole Agave for Bats program, where they see that there's a need for agave restoration and a need to support nectar feeding bats. So now this leads me into tequila, getting into agave spirits in general. This is a stock image of a tequila field. When you think about agave spirits, most people, if you were to talk to about, oh, the product that you distill from agaves, most people are going to think of tequila. It's so well known. It's so widely spread across the entire world. In the US, it's over $2 billion industry a year. It's just massive. And making these, these fields and putting effort into these huge agave plantations for tequila was able to be done at such a rapid rate, partly because when you think about agave production and propagation, the plants are thinking about the seeds, But agaves are really special where they're also putting out clones. So they don't need to flower to reproduce. A lot of the energy that goes into the base of the plant is also producing pups. And I think it's really cute that baby agaves and baby bats are both called pups. I think we should take note of that one. But tequila is important because it's the most well-known, yet it isn't the first agave spirit. Agave spirits were developed all over Mexico. Leah will talk about the history of a lot of that domestication and use, but it was one of the first, the very first spirits or products that was put into a denomination of origin. And this is important mostly because denominations of origin are wonderful in the sense of it's trying to protect the historic use of a product. So for example, you can't produce champagne anywhere other than the Champagne region of France. And it's similar with, all these listed products. So you see when Baccanora came online, when Sotol, when all these different products that Mexico said, this is our product, this is where it's from. The good parts of that is that it is trying to protect the origin. Some of the problems are that it's rarely a complete guide to where that product has historically been produced. It can get very political because groups are trying to vie for regulating something and making rules so that you can have censorship around what's allowed. And then it can be geographically limiting. So in the case of tequila, part of the rules that that's built into the whole being able to call tequila tequila is you can't produce from seed. It has to be a clone of the tequila agave. This automatically makes it tricky to allow the plants to flower because there isn't any real added benefit to doing that. And David Suro likes to talk a lot about how there are regions in Mexico that are not included in the municipality of the denomination of origin that have still been producing tequila, but they're not recognized. So they're unable to really sell their product and get it out there. Mezcal now has a denomination. Baccanora now has a denomination. There will probably be even more popping up throughout Mexico because this is something that people are really interested in and love the culture and the history of these amazing agave spirits. Something that's really inspired the work that we've done with in our region with agaves is looking at the work of David Suro and Rodrigo Medellin regarding bat-friendly tequila and the whole tequila interchange project that was put together. They have certain rules. This is a picture from David Suro. This isn't tequila, but this is mezcal. You can see an agave being, flowering in the background. And this is trying to promote within the tequila industry, allowing a percentage of the agaves to go to flower for bats, practicing a more sustainable agriculture by reducing the amount of pesticides, because if you're pouring pesticides on plants, that then gets transferred into the flower and the nectar in the plant, which could really hurt bats. Encouraging production of the agave tequila from seed so that you're increasing genetic diversity and you're coming up with a stronger agricultural product. And in some ways, this has been a very successful project. They've sold and produced over 300,000 bottles that have been released in Australia and Europe and the United States. But when you look at the huge impact and the amount of bottles produced by tequila in general, this is something that is not super adopted yet. The tequila industry is one of the older industries for agave spirits. It's hard to change when you have the politics and a culture around an industry like this. But between David Suro and Rodrigo Medellin, who is the Batman of Mexico and is an incredible bat biologist, this is just an amazing project that you should really look into. They always need support. They're looking for funding and is one of the future ways that we can continue to have sustainable agave spirits coming from our region. So going back to, the whole bat issue. As you could see from the maps, these bats, these nectar-feeding bats, are moving through the tequila region, they're moving through the mezcal region, they're moving through the Baccanora region, and they're, just looking for food. They're looking for flowering agaves, they're looking for flowering cactus. And for a long time, the lesser long-nosed bat was on the endangered species list. The greater long-nosed bat is still on the endangered species list, Leptonicterus nivalis. But our bat that comes up west and goes along that western part of Mexico and into the Southwest US, they recently delisted it in the United States. This caused an absolute uproar from conservationists and bat friends alike. People were just like, why are you delisting this bat where the agave spirit industry is increasing? More and more people are using agave plants for booze production and not letting them flower because there's money in those plants, and it didn't seem economical to let the plants flower. In general, the plants are going through a bit of an ecological crisis in this region, the agave plants. In our region, there was a really bad frost in 2011 that killed off a lot of young juvenile agaves. We're currently in this horrible drought that's causing a lot of agaves to be eaten. This is a huge problem. And again, agaves only flower once in their life. So you're unable to harvest the agave or use it in any way for agave spirit production without killing the plant. And especially in our neck of the woods, these agaves are taking, over a decade often to finally flower. So this is an issue that even if you start planting them now, like this work needs to be done right now. And the more seeds we can use, the better, because it means that the plants were pollinated by bats in the first place. And this is the kind of work that these cute little bats need right now. They're so cute. So before I pass it over to Leah and Valeria, I'm going to talk briefly about some of the work, the restoration work that Borderlands Restoration is doing with agaves, and hit on some of the species before Leah takes it away and talks about the history of Baccanora and the projects in Sonora. So the main agave that we work with on this side of the border is the Agave Palmere. This is a super big, sexy agave. This is one of my favorite pictures of it flowering because I've only really ever seen a few that look this big where the flowers are all the way down on the stalk, but they can just get huge and gorgeous. They flower depending on if they're produced from seed or clonally, probably 15 to 30 years. They're slower growing than some of the other agaves in the region or in the Southwest because they're so cold tolerant. You find them all the way up to about 8,000 feet, but these are agaves that can deal with temperatures into the teens. I love all the photos of them covered in snow. The older an agave is, the better it will be at being cold tolerant, but they're just really amazing plants, and they're just chocked full of anthocyanins. And as soon as it'll freeze on them, instead of dying, like the leaves will turn red. It's really, really cool to see them in action. We've produced close to 5,000 agaves at this point from seed. This was one of our earliest projects that we did in conjunction with Bat Conservation International and the National Park Service, where we grew out 1,200 agaves from seed. These agaves that you see in this photo are close to 4 years old. And you can see from seed, you can see they're really healthy root systems. They're easy to transport because you can bare root them. And we planted these at the Coronado National Monument by Hereford area, right on the border. And this was actually an early border wall restoration project from previous border work that had happened in the early 2000s. And they killed a bunch of agaves and were restoring them. This project actually got hit really hard from javelina damage. And a large part of our work at this point is protecting agaves from javelina and other predators. When I first started working with this plant, I was really excited to finally have a plant in restoration ecology that didn't need as much water. So I was like, oh, this will be so easy to work with a really drought tolerant species But then sure enough, they're chock full of sugar, they're chock full of water. So the javelinas, the rodents, they get eaten so quickly. So at this point, we have all kinds of different caging methods, both like along the ground. We also just really think about suitability studies. I want to give a big shout out to Rachel Burke and other researchers that have worked tirelessly over the years, looking at agave suitability areas, looking at applied restoration. A lot of the work of Elise Gornish's lab is looking at agave restoration. There's so much wonderful work being done to try and figure out what's going to be successful and what's going to work in these efforts. This is the distribution map. With the connectivity challenge that we won, Lea and Valeria will go into the certification process and the sustainability aspect. But I want to do a plug for the mapping efforts that Erin Rorden is heading up, and we're currently recruiting volunteers for. It's very easy for us to say in every presentation that Agave Palmere populations are dwindling, but the truth is we don't really have a solid baseline data set to really look at the populations and whether or not these populations are healthy and reproducing, or if they're failing and they're not doing well. So this is mostly herbarium data points from the region, but we're recruiting people to go out. It's like a nice social distancing activity where I send you the information, you can ask questions, but you go out and you mark with GPS coordinates where agave populations are and how they're doing on a little scale that we have set up. Ways to get involved with this kind of work on the ground happening is donating to Colectivo, donating to us. I also want to do a plug while I can for the National Phenology Network. They're doing a big Zoom meeting recruiting people on this Friday at noon, and you can go to their website and find their Zoom link. But this is really cool work, and for the last few years we've contributed to this program, where as climates are changing, with climate change, plants are flowering at different times, and this really impacts the migrations of all kinds of pollinators. But the National Phenology Network, you basically write down and record the flowering times of pretty much any plant you can put into the database, but they then have specific campaigns, and one of them is the Flower for Bats program. So you can adopt saguaro area, you can adopt agave populations, you can adopt these different areas and use data, input data into this. And yeah, you can always come and volunteer. We'll have planting soon, the Colectivo after COVID, maybe next year sometime, we'll be able to have some fun events. But yeah, we're really looking forward to being able to work with more people in our citizen science and hands-on restoration work in the future. So moving into the agaves in Sonora, we don't have any of this wonderful agave angustifolia in our neck of the woods in Arizona. This is a population that at one point was the most widespread agave species in all of Mexico. Their life cycle is about 7 to 10 years. They're a little faster growing. They're a little less cold hardy. This is a wonderful plant and is the Baccanora plant. And this photo I just really love down here on the corner because it shows an absolute large, huge patch of flowering agave angustifolia. And this is something that's really hard to find in Sonora or anywhere else in Mexico these days. So here's the distribution map of the current distribution map of herbarium samples collected from of agave angustifolia. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Colectivo's presentation. Let's get into agave angustifolia and Baccanora. Oh, and here's the Baccanora map and the migration route through the denominación, which is really fun. Okay, ¿lista, Lea?
Sí. Okay, so I'm gonna be talking to you guys about a brief history of Baccanora. We think that it's very important to have the context because that explains why the industry is right now where it is. My name is Ibarra. I'm from Colectivo Sonora Silvestre. And just to understand a little bit more of the context of the industry and the social components that impacted both on the production and the ecosystems here in Sonora. This information and this timeline was actually created based on some articles from Dr. Vidal Salazar. And if anyone's interested on learning more or reading more about it, you can guys just reach me or Francesca or Valeria, and we can send those articles. So everything starts with in the 12th century, when during the migration to the Valley of Mexico, the Aztecs discovered the agaves, and then they started to use them in different ways. Among them, they invented the pulque. Although the Academy, the Mexican Academy of Tequila claims that there is an archaeological evidence of the consumption of pulque way before the Aztec period. However, we also have evidence that the Aztec culture contributed a lot to refine and extend the cultivation of maguey and its product, incorporating them to ceremonies and religious practices, including, of course, human sacrifice, because, you know, Aztecas. So just so you know, pulque is a traditional Mexican fermented beverage. It has a prehistoric origin, and it's made by the fermentation of the sap. So what you see here is Mayahuel. I thought it would be like very interesting to you guys also to explain about this deity. Mayahuel is known to be a very, very important religious deity, since she is a goddess of pulque, and Aztecs love the pulque. She actually represents soil fertility, and it's said that when she's transformed into an agave, she provides men with the necessary gift to survive. She's also known to be the mother of 100 rabbits, known as Senson Tonochin. You can see them in the picture. You can translate Senson Tonochin to 400 rabbits in Nahuatl. These rabbits were the gods of drunkenness. And it's also, like the legend says, that she had 400 breasts to feed all of her children. The legend has it that a storm struck a field of agave, and the lightning struck of the plants make them cook their hearts and causing their syrup to turn into honey. So the Indians considering this as a divine gift from Mayahuel. And so from that moment, they worshipped her and used her in their ceremonial rituals. So this comes from a lot of time before. And well, coming back to the timeline, and to enrich a little bit more the context, it's known that indigenous people from the northern region, later to be known as Sonorenses, already have been using alcoholic beverages in their ceremonies and other activities in the community. And when the European came to America, they brought a new technique, the distillation technique, which was incorporated to the elaboration of agave alcoholic beverages. And so the mezcal, as we know, was created. So I'm going to talk a little bit more right here. Thank you, Francesca. I'm going to stop a little bit more in this point because there's a really, really cool history behind it. So after this cultural overlap that had the indigenous people with the European, the mezcal consumption stopped being indigenous exclusive consumption and then extended to the European missionaries. And there's actually evidence of Jesuits often consuming it. And you can find hundreds of narratives about their letters and reports from the region. There's even a document that reports that one of these missionaries, the Jesuit Francisco Dominguez, which was in charge of the Navajoa mission, which is a municipality a little bit south from Sonora, produced, consumed, and sold mezcal aguardiente. That's how they used to call it. Although there's very little information about the procedures of mezcal production, and this is because, of course, the Spanish crown saw it like something really, really bad. Well, this same Spanish crown was interested in detaching the alcohol consumption with the religious ceremonies and then converted to an addiction. So these people actually used mezcal or alcoholic beverage in the ceremonies, but for the Spanish crown, that wasn't something really good. So what they did is they started detaching these practices from religion. This way, through the indigenous consumption of alcohol, they could easily handle them. For example, the Vice King Bernardo de Galvez commanded that the Apaches receive aguardiente as part of their rations. This with the purpose of earning the wheel, allowing them to discover their deepest secret and numbing them so their attacks will be less severe and creating a necessity, that will force them to recognize their dependence to the Spanish. Also, the alcoholism that was induced to these indigenous people led them to a really great harm and dependence. All of this was a strategy for colonization, and they actually used their own traditions to dominate them. And at the same time, these beverages were used by the royal treasury to raise a substantial amount of funds, so much that it's said that pulque the pulque provided New Spain like half of the incomes that the mines did, right? So it was a huge amount of income coming to the Spanish, but also they were actually punishing people here. So once again, back to the timeline. In 1783, Felipe de Neve, can you go? You click and go, please, Francesca. So that dude, Felipe de Neve, he was a governor for Sonora. He was also, I think, at some point the vice king. But when he was a governor for the Western Interior provinces, which included a part of the United States, actually, but mainly Baja California, Sonora, and Sinaloa, noted that the mezcal produced the largest tax revenue in the royal treasury, or what we commonly know like La Hacienda Real here in Mexico. And then, however, in 1785, the royal order prohibited the production from Sonora to Tehuantepec. So all of that territory was prohibited. And then 10 years later, in 1795, the first permit to produce tequila was granted, but the rest of the states and the rest of the municipalities were still maintained under prohibition. So can you click it again? Yes, I don't know if I have something better than that. Okay. So the government also used the taxes gathered by mezcal production as a strategy to control the communities and colonize indigenous people. Since these taxes could be redeemed in exchange to all of the producers that will only use this to buy weapons to combat the Indians or the indigenous people in their own native territory, that were attacking, as they say, they were not attacking, they were defending the northern border region. And this period is also the oldest reference of mezcal exportation to the United States. So right now we're in 1879, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then just please give me a second. Okay, so by 1910, there were 56 aguardientes factories registered in Sonora, which used maguey as raw material, with more than 70 stills that produced a little bit more than 800,000 liters. Most of it was consumed in the state, but it was also being shipped to Sinaloa and Baja California. So this very rapid increase in the production of aguardiente from a little bit more than 400,000 to a little bit more than 800,000 could not longer rely exclusively on wild agave as a source of raw material. So since 1910, people already knew that we needed to plant more agaves. Like this is the populations, wild populations are not enough. Therefore, some regions started to incorporate crops in their agricultural normal practices. And by 1912, there were 4 municipalities with agave crops here in Sonora. And it's known that this crop supplied an estimated of 8,000 liters of mezcal that represented 10% of the state production. But suddenly, one of the biggest threats happened to Baccanora in industry throughout the history. In August 1915, the Sonora government, which was Plutarco Elias Calles, prohibited the manufacture and commercialization of alcoholic beverages, including Baccanora. This law is commonly known, or for us is known as Ley Calles or Ley Seca. And it was very, very harmful for the Baccanora industry for a long period of time. This was mainly argued because Calles believed that the consumption of Baccanora was strongly related to the vandalic activities of the villistas. Of course, we can all remember that what was going on that time. So Plutarco Calles was a Carrancista, and then Carranza separated from Villa, and then they have some struggle over there. So that's why that's the main reason why they prohibited the alcoholic beverages. Even though this law was defeated 4 years later in 1919, mainly because of this, because it was harming the state economy. Like there was a lot of moral issues right there, but the thing that decided, or that was like a key for it to be defeated, it was because it was harming very bad the economy of the state and the country. Although the next governments that empathized with Calles continued the persecution of mezcal consumption, adding penalties to the industry. So there's a lot of questions of why this law was only activated for 4 years, why the provision was for 77 years. Let me tell you. Well, under the protection of these provisions, the destruction of distilleries was promoted, as well as the persecution and imprisonments of those who violate the law. This law actually permitted the abuse of power, since the action of the rural police, also known as La Cordada, were abusing and cruel towards the producers that were being repressed, imprisoned, and even brutally killed during the Prohibition period. There are some narratives of people that used to live there that said like, oh yeah, I mean, in the 19-something, yeah, somebody hung up this person because he was a Baccanora producers, and they were actually very afraid of La Cordada because of it. So all this violence led the Baccanora industry to secrecy. And even though they were pursued, tortured, and killed by the Cordada, viñateros didn't stop. We call viñateros people that produce Baccanora. They didn't stop producing Baccanora. They just started hiding them, sometimes in caves or underground. They used to produce it by night. So they did a lot of different things for them not to be fined. So because of this brave nonstop industry, in 1992, the state government recognizes Baccanora as a regional beverage in the sanitary regulation of alcoholic beverages, and included criteria to regulate its production, distribution, storage, transportation, sale, and consumption. With this, the long period of prohibition that lasted almost 80 years was finally over. So now on November 6th of 2000, the Baccanora denomination of origin area law, because it's a law, was published. Oh, that's a picture actually of villistas drinking Baccanora, which is really cool, I think. So yeah, like I was saying, in 2000, the Baccanora denomination of origin law, which is the law that Francesca was talking about before, was published in the official journal of the Federation, or how the Mexicans know, el Diario Oficial de la Federación. This decree protects the exclusivity of 35 municipalities in Sonora for the production of mezcal under the Baccanora denomination. And then in 2004, the Fund for Baccanora Productive Objectives was created with the objective of formalizing the Baccanora industry. So the government knew that there was like a lack of laws, a lack of regulation, and that people was not going to stop making Baccanora. It was a traditional since the pre-Hispanic era. So they decided to create the fund. So this fund was uniting the efforts of scientific community, civil society, government institutions, as well as social business and sectors linked to the industry. And then they created the Norma Oficial del Baccanora, which is like the official, I don't know if to say norma, the official law for Baccanora, you can say that. And it was published in the official Gazette of the Federation, that's el Diario Oficial de la Federación. This initiative also promoted the creation of Baccanora regulation, and in October of 2006, the governor of Sonora at that time, which was Eduardo Bus Castelo, officially created the Consejo Regulador Sonorense del Baccanora. This is a government agency in charge of regulating Baccanora production, sales, and consumptions, as well as addressing the problems that the industry continuously faces. And with this, a formalized and regulated industry of Baccanora started to finally grow and expand in Mexico and in the whole world. Those were, can you just go back a little bit? That's a very cool, one more?
I'm sorry, it won't do it.
Oh, it's okay. It was just a picture. I thought it was nice to see, but that's it. Okay, right there. That's acordada. So we had rural polices here in Mexico at that time. And then these rural police paid other people, just like bounty hunters, to go search for these people that made Baccanora and arrest them or beat them up or sometimes kill them. Yeah. So that's a picture about those people. And then the next picture is from the Consejo Regulador del Baccanora. That's the logo, and that's an agency that we actually very closely work with to make our projects happen. So that's it. Next, please. Thank you. Well, as it has been documented that agave, along with bread and with meat, was one of the most important ancestral foods for the Aztecs, and they sure knew how to take advantage of the whole plant. They used two different types of beverages at the time, which was aguamiel and it was pulque. None of them used the distillate procedure. But one of them was taken from the plant and the other one was fermented. Next, please. Okay. So in one of these articles, Dr. Salazar mentioned that the agave was used in many ways by the native people. From the stalks obtained, they obtained threads to wave sacks, rocks, backpacks, or fishing nets. The whole stalk was used to roof the houses, as you can see in the pictures. The dry stalks were used as beams and fences to delimit lands. The barbs or spines were used as nails or needles. The roots were used to make brushes, brooms, and baskets. And the use of maguey, in addition to honey, because they also made honey, was used to make the ritual drink pulque that I just told you guys before. Next, please. He also mentions that the artists used agave as well to produce mosaic works, to print symbols and hieroglyphics. There's also evidence of documents created on agave paper that they produced. Many of these uses were taken by the mestizo culture, but the most transcendental one was the one that originated mezcal. And right here above, you can see paper with a hieroglyphic and some drowns. That's agave paper. And then on your right, you can see some, like fabrics made from agave that they used for different purposes. Next, please. Thank you. So in Mexico, we have a very important diversity of beverages derived from agave. And to understand a little bit better about this, you can classify them into two large groups. Those produced from the runoff of sugars after scarping the stem, which is agua, miel, and pulque. You can still find these beverages in northern and southern Mexico. We don't really have them much here, but yeah. And those produced by boiling the heads, stems, and leaves to obtain distilled beverages that we generally know them as like mezcal. But you have, of course, you have mezcal, you have tequila, you have sotol. So it's they are different. There's also a difference between these beverages in response of the area production. That's why we typically find mezcal in South and Central Mexico. And then, like I was saying, sotol, we can find it in Chihuahua, and Baccanora, we find it in Sonora. On the left, you can find the denominations of origin for mezcal, Baccanora, and tequila in the states that have such permit. So as you can appreciate, the only state of Mexico that can produce mezcal, that can produce Baccanora is Sonora, and it's just 35% of the municipalities. So next. Yeah, next, please. Thank you. So in Sonora, you can find other alcoholic beverages as well. One of them is lechuguilla. This is made mainly from 3 species of agave, Agave Palmere, Agave bovicornuta, Agave Distribution. And at your right, you can see a picture of Agave angustifolia that's used to produce Baccanora. You can see the whole morphological differences. They're not that alike, so it's very easy to distinguish them. And it's important to emphasize that for a beverage to be called Baccanora, it has to be from the species Agave angustifolia. It necessarily has to be from that species. And it has to be produced within the 35 municipalities of Sonora that have the denomination of origin. So if I want to make Baccanora here in Hermosillo, even if I take plants from, I don't know, Alamos, which has the denomination of origin, I cannot produce it here and call it Baccanora. It will be just an agave distillate. So that's how important is the denomination of origin for these beverages. Can you give next, please? Thank you. And now I'm just going to leave you with this beautiful quote. It's from Dr. Salazar. He dedicated most of his work to the understanding of the history and the social and political environment of the industry of Baccanora. And thank you. I'll pass it on to Valeria now.
Hello, I'm Valeria, and I'm gonna be talking a little bit fast because I think it is almost time, but I'm gonna explain it, I hope, really good. So I'm Valeria Cañedo, I'm part of Colectivo Sonora Silvestre, and I'm gonna be talking to you about the restoration efforts we have done and we're doing right now in Sonora. A little bit of context. Back in 2018, Francesca actually invited us to be part of this amazing project, which is a milling of agaves. This was a strategy for the protection of the lesser long-nosed bat and, of course, the plants they feed on. It is a project based on Arizona and Sonora. Our first goal was to plant 1,000 agaves. We did it in 3 different municipalities, all of them within the nation of origin. Just Hermosillo was one of a strategy for environmental education. This is also something that Francesca already mentioned. Well, the lesson known as that has no category here in Mexico, and they basically feed on maguey and saguaros. And of course, what we also try to tell the producers all the time is what they provide to them, which is a pollination service. This is one of the signs we put on. Every part we planted, we put this like, this is a restoration site. It's like agave restoration site. This is actually the one that it's in La Colorada, which is a this volunteer.
Yeah.
Conservación.
Natural protected area.
It's a volunteer area, which is an área destinada voluntariamente a la conservación, would be like a volunteer designated area for conservation. So this project, the idea was to promote the conservation of the lesser long-nosed bat during its migration, because it is a migratory species, by restoring the agave angustifolia populations. But we can go and plant agaves, but if we don't tell the people how important it is, that's why we have this second objective, which is create a commitment to bat conservation with the community of the municipalities where the agave is naturally distributed. And of course, based on that, is promote the importance and is ecological restoration with agave conservation and Baccanora production in Sonora. So this is what we did the first year. We planned a little bit more in Hermosillo, but it was part of our outreach part. And we planted 460 agaves in Alamos back in 2018, 19. Yeah, kind of, right? Alamos has one of the biggest maternity capes for the lesser long-nosed bat, and also have some transition capes. That's why we decide this site was like the best one. With this project, we planted the agaves within 50 kilometers around the capes. The reason is this species can fly almost 100 kilometers just to find food every night. So we try to help them a little bit, planting agaves within the 50 kilometers. This is a little bit what we did. You can see here, the first time we did something, it was actually the next one. Can you put it, please? I think it's the next one. Yeah. In 2017, Francesca and her team, which is Perrin and Allegra, talked to us and said like, hey, can we do a workshop in Unison? We were Unison students, biology, by the way. And we said, yeah, of course, we can do this. And we did a workshop for the students and everyone that wants to be part of about the importance in the ecological restoration between bats and agaves. And some of the photos of the community engagement, it's part of it. And another one is from Alamos, and we have done a lot of work. And the one in the middle is Osvaldo Colorado. Actually, this is his bottle, Siete Coronados. He's the one, he was like one of the first that believe in us since the beginning, right? He was like, yeah, sure, guys, we can do whatever. Just bring people here and talk to them about all these amazing things you have told me. So this is a little bit of it. Can you please go next? This is a meeting of agaves 2019 in Alamos, Sonora. This is a park that I told you, which is a conservation area. We had a lot of people planting agaves with us, and we just went there and they look amazing. So no jabalina. In 2019, we have been invited almost every year to the International Baccanora Festival to do our presentation. In 2019, we decided that just a presentation, it was not like make that much impact. So we decided to plant agaves in the main entrance of Baccanora. So if you go to Tequila, Jalisco, you can see agaves everywhere. But in Baccanora, which is why the beverage is called, there was just this agave. So we planted almost, well, around 150 agaves in the entrance just to make it look like more like Baccanora, like the agave culture in it. Next. So from 2017 to 2020, we have been really lucky to collaborate with all these amazing organizations, institutes, universities, government agencies. And we got like from them all the different aspects that were part of the Baccanora industry. And can you go next? Based on that, we have these environmental agencies, we have the social part, we have the economic one, and we have the institutional political, and that give us sustainable development. But we got this, imagine this. So we have all this information from different people, like, hey, you should do this, or why are we not doing this? And you just try to take it from different parts. And we found out, you can go next, how we can do it. So the environmental part of Baccanora is conserving the migratory route of the lesser known-nose bat, and of course, the wild agave populations. Because as Lea says, they were totally destroyed with this prohibition for 77 years. On the social part, we know they need the agave to produce it, so support the rural population and the promotion of the culture that Baccanora gives to Sonora. On the economic side, the production improvement will help to support the rural populations that produce this beverage, and of course, the promotion of the Baccanora sustainable product. And the hardest part actually is to get involved with government agencies. And for us was really, really, I don't know how to say, it was not easy. It was just like, we were always there. So the Baccanora, so the Sonora and Baccanora Regulatory Council was really, really open with us. It's like, hey, give me your ideas. And that's how we get into the political part. Also, universities and management organizations were really a big part of it. And that's how we decide to do, can you give it next? Fobades. I'm sorry. This is actually the photo of the background is agave, is Siete Coronados, agave field. You can see there's some flower stalks that are cut off, but if you go now, they're like at least 10 or 15 flower stalks you can find. Yes.
They're just very small. That's why they can see it, right?
Yes.
They're not that big.
So Fobades has three like principal aspects. So the environmental one is that what I already told you is promote the conservation of the environmental services provided by the agaves and bats, because it's not just the agave that do environmental services. Also, the agave is one of the best plants to fight the climate change. Part of it is development of agroecological techniques and technologies for agave cultivation. And the economic part is to try to guide the agave in Baccanora industry for sustainable production, because there is people that just make Baccanora and don't grow agaves, but there's also people that just grow agaves. So how to get to the sustainable production of those. Part of this is increase the value of agave and its derivatives in its local international market. Because if we're trying, that's what we're trying to do actually, trying to increase this value, doing this environmental value, adding this environmental value to it. And the social one, which is what I think is one of the most important ones, is create sources of employment in rural communities. Usually people that lives in these small towns, they migrate to the city because there's no work, there's no jobs they can do. So we try to reinforce the social identity that revolves around maguey and Baccanora. Okay. So I'm gonna go really fast with this. What do we do? Well, okay, we're trying to conserve agaves, Baccanora industry, and bats. So what we offer to the producers that want to be part of our project, which is we offer them a pollinator garden. This one right here is 200 agave plants in Real de Álamos, Baccanora, Living fences are actually living fences is agaves on the fence that protect the agaves from the field and also protect from predators and every other thing. Next, please. This is one of the parts that is like one of the best. A flower stock produced from 1,000 to 30,000 seeds, an average of 18,000. So we're usually asking, I'm gonna just briefly talk about the requirements. So for example, if you leave 220 plants, you will have almost 4 million of seeds. So per kilogram, you can find 8,000 seeds. If you have all these plants with the flower stock producing seeds, you can have 400, almost 500 kilograms of seed. And here, seeds are 3,000 pesos each kilo, almost. So that's one of the benefits are like more, how can I say, like give like economical impact to the producers. And as Leah and Francesca says, they usually reproduce them from pups or just like plant them. This is like another benefit we're trying to give them. Other thing is workshop with specialists, experts, conference in agroecology, and this part was a little tricky right now with the pandemics where we're trying to do everything virtual. So wait for it. Another thing is advertising, of course, trying to do this like, hey, this producer is making the Baccanora as a ways was we are trying to make it. And yes. This is one of the most attractive benefits for the producer. Once they comply with all the agroecological guidelines we suggest, they're gonna receive a sustainable Baccanora label that are gonna be on their bottles. The idea of this bottle is to increase the value in the market internationally and locally. This label will be certified by the Consejo Sonora del Baccanora. And what else do you want to add to that?
Well, it will allow producers to sell their products in Mexico and in the other parts of the world a little bit expensiver than the competition. This is because they're following the guidelines, they're getting an extra level that's, you know, recognizing them as a, how do you say that? Like a friendly Baccanora for the environment. So yeah, that's mainly the reason of it. And of course, to be part of an elite group of producers that are following the guidelines.
Yeah, this is just the resume of the guidelines we asked to them. So 1% of the crop designated to conservation. That means leave them bloom. Water stations for wildlife every 5 hectares. This is because we're trying to know what wildlife is like sharing space with agave crops. Active pest monitoring for crops. I'm gonna talk just briefly for that in a minute. Clearing that excludes protected species. We usually find ironwoods and other protected species on the area, so we ask them to not take them out. They need to do renewal of the membership, and of course comply with agreements when conducting an environmental audit, which is every year. So this little friend right here, it's Agaves now Weevil. This is what I can say, horrifies the tequila industry usually. For us, it is not that big of a deal, but it could be. Right now, we have them here. The scientific name is Sulphorus acupunctatus. This is measures is between 2 and 3 centimeters. It is a pretty big one to be a weevil, actually. It's a corrective pest. That means that this insect mainly pass all his lifetime inside the plant. This is an adult, but I'm gonna show you the larvae. So this adult also make injuries to the plant. So you can see this snout on the on the photo, this usually, I'm gonna explain it. Okay, they usually inject this snout into the plant. So they leave the plant to get like possible diseases because they're exposed to everything outside. You can go next. So, as I said before, this represents one of the most important pests in Mexico, at least for the agave industry, since it does not affect the agave that are in the fields. It also affects the wild populations. So this larvae right here, it is also a big one. Can you see the plant, the photo in the middle? That was a quiote, and they fed on it when it was growing. On the other side, you can see the adults on the traps we install for them. Can you please go next? And this is what they do to the agave leaves. So you can see there's a tiny one also in the photo hiding between the leaves. It's an adult. And the other one is what I said before, is traps we set for them. It's kind of like
Of trampas. Trampa caída.
it's a sorry, pitfall trap.
We know it in Spanish though.
It's like a pitfall trap, but it's more specialized. Can you go next? So what we do with them is we place one trap every 2 hectares of the agave field. The trap, it is placed like this deep. It contains a specific pheromone. The idea of this is not to attract any other, like, could be good for the agave field. Yeah, like benefit fauna, I'll see. So this is like really, really specific. This trap also contains like salty water. We don't use any insecticide. We use bait. We use agave leaf or agave penca. And we do this monitoring every 15 days. This is how it looks when it's set it up. We have luckily not found anything that it's not the agave snout wheel in there. Another part important that I mentioned before, we set up a trail camera on the fields just to know what other wildlife it's also using these areas. That's why we put the water for them. And the goal is to generate information on the native wildlife we found in the sites, and of course, promote the study of wildlife.
Hey guys, I hate to interrupt. We want to make sure we have time for questions. So just when it's at your earliest convenience, if you could wrap up, that would be just
Okay.
make sure. Yeah, thanks.
Sure. You can go next. The water station, and that's a photo. I think we can close with this one. So this is a little bit example what Fobades looks like. That's us talking to the producer, installing the traps, setting the trail cameras.
Yes. So I think we're ready for the question round. Sorry for taking that long. This usually never happens to us, but sorry. And yeah, whatever question you have for me, Valeria or Francesca.
Well, I want to say thanks for the thorough presentations. Really appreciate that. Maybe I could get us started on the questions. I have something that occurred to me while you guys were speaking was, you said it's been a little bit tricky to work with government officials in this project. And, you know, having had some research experience in Mexico with campesino communities further south, you know, there's a long history of kind of push and pull between the state and producers. The state has its vision of how development should go, and campesinos often have a different one. So there's a lot of negotiation that takes place. Could you talk a little bit about the Consejo's vision for the future of the Baccanora industry, and how on board they are with with the conservation efforts?
La diferencia entre los government.
Creo que es más que nada qué tan metido está el consejo y qué es su perspectiva.
Okay, well, yeah, sure. I was really happy to answer. We have actually been very lucky to be working with the Consejo since 2008. How I mentioned before, the Consejo was actually made from 2004 to 2006, so it's a very, very new agency. They do not have a lot of people working there, and the people that are working there, they're very concerned to not make mistakes and to try and make this, the whole process of industrializing something like Baccanora easier, faster, because there are people making Baccanora in the Sierra. The only thing is that they're not certified. So they're very, very willing to help those people certified, and they're very willing to support projects like ours about conservation and ecological production and sustainability. They're just like very, very interested. So it has never been hard for us to work with the Consejo because of that. They're very, very smart, capable people. Like I said, they don't have much of funds to actually, support economically, these kind of things. So we usually just come with them with funds and with a project, and they're like, yes, this is what I was looking for. So yeah, as far as for the Consejo, it has never been that hard. We're actually good friends. We go and take a coffee with them every once and then just to see what up. But they're definitely interested also, and also marketing in the United States market, like they're trying to get the bottles there. They're trying to get the producer certified, so everything goes on rule. So yeah, it has been very easy in terms that they're very nice people. They're very willing to participate.
I think I can add right now, we in Sonora, we are producing 250,000 liters of Baccanora per year. So this is just based on the producers that are certified. What they think is they want to at least reach the 300,000 liters goal. That's one of the things they have been talking about. And
yeah, and well, we don't want to come as biologists or scientists and say stop doing this, but we can do this better. We can support your production, and we can increase your production, and we can increase the amount of producers are working under the norma oficial. So I think that's why it has been a little bit easy. Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. That's great.
Thank you.
So now, given the 2011 freeze, which wiped out something like 60% of Angustifolia in Sonora pretty much overnight, it's post 2011 where the rise of Baccanora is beginning to happen. So there's this weird tension between interest in the industry on the part of producers as well as government folks, I would imagine, and others. A tension between that and just the plant supplies are hit so hard. So where are producers sourcing agave? And in particular, is there more of a plantation style happening now, kind of along the lines of tequila or espadín in Oaxaca?
Yeah, well, where they're getting the plants, most of them have crops, Baccanora crops, but then there are a lot of Baccanora that you can see on the level that it's made by wild agave. So it's kind of a thing also to make Baccanora from wild agave. People have this believing that it tastes better. There are also people that only produce maguey, and this ranch that produce maguey produces the material for different marcas. So you say marcas?
brands.
For different brands, yeah. So you can find the same maguey from these people that produces, and you can find it in this brand and in this brand and in this other brand, because it's very expensive to have maguey crops. Like I said, most of them have the crops, and then they do something like 60-40, where 60% is from crops, and then 40 you can find it from the wild. Usually the ones that are made from wild Baccanora are more expensive than the ones that are made from crops. But that's all just because it's a tradition. That's something that you can change once you give a little bit of a, not education, but awareness of what it's going to happen if you continue doing this.
Based on what you said about the 2011 frost, actually, there was some, I would say Grupo Mexico, for example, they give thousands and thousands of plants to the producers that were really affected by this frost. So there's also this other kinds of support they have. I don't have any knowledge about CONAFOR and other.
Yeah, CONAFOR did give a couple of thousand plants also to the producers. And of course, you have to think that agave, it's a very, very strong plant. When if you compare it to like a normal food crop, like watermelons or things that we grow in the region, of course Baccanora is going to be a little bit more resilient because of the type of plant that it is. But yeah, there were also a lot of help from the government agency, private agencies that will give just Baccanora for them to keep doing it.
We have a question from Mike Hurley, who you guys know.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mike.
He's asking you to explain certification a little bit better. He says there don't appear to be many certified, but there are many registered. And I guess he's talking about producers. Many registered, but not many certified. Is that just because the program is new or?
Yeah, okay. Under the norma oficial del Baccanora, I guess he's asking. Yeah, there's kind of an estimated record that we have at least 1,000 people producing Baccanora in the Sierra of Sonora, which 7 of them are certified under the Consejo. So what you need to do to certify yourself, you have to, there's a norma oficial del Baccanora that I mentioned before, and it has some guidelines. So those guidelines are about like where your distillery is, what kind of material you're using, how much alcohol percentage you have, how many times you distillate them, and so and so.
How many money you have to do all these tests too?
So you have to follow those guidelines and contact the Consejo, then get the guidelines, you follow the guidelines, and then you contact the Consejo again. And they go and make like a checklist, I think. Auditoria, we call it in Spanish, I'm sure. An audit to your place. And then they're like, okay, you have it. Or okay, maybe you have it, but you're still using this material that it's not under the norm. So then that's like the procedure until the Consejo says, yeah, okay, you have everything that's asked in the norm. Now you can be registered.
I know about that you can be registered as regional product, but it necessarily to be Baccanora. That's why it's probably Mike is asking why is there so much registered is because of that. I also just want to highlight the Consejo is a really, really small group. It's like 5 people working on all the Consejo. So I think that's another of the reasons as why there's no more, because there's a lot of work they need to put and there's a lack of capacity, a really big one.
Yes.
Well, folks, it is 7:30 and we like to end at 7:30. But actually real quick, I have a question for Francesca before we close. The lechuguilla from the north is from Palmere for the most part. So I wonder, Francesca, if you have any comment on the exploitation of that species, especially in the Cañedo area, where a lot of it's coming from for those who produce lechuguilla, and whether there may be some prospects for producing a US side mezcal, which couldn't be called mezcal, but an agave distillate on the US side.
Yeah, we have so many questions and so many people that reach out about agave spirit production in the United States. One of the areas that we're going to check out to monitor our agave Palmere populations is that area around Cananea, because it's a well-known site of having a lot of agaves being harvested in that area. As of now, luckily for the population of Agave Palmere, we have a fairly healthy population. You can drive around the mountains here and really see that the plant is very widespread and seems to be doing well. We feel good about the baseline, like getting the baseline numbers down, but we're not particularly worried about it disappearing on this side anytime soon. I really encourage everyone to grow agave because it's such a wonderful plant. I'm also a big fan of letting it flower for bats in the region. One of my biggest fears of an agave spirit industry really taking off in the United States is that it would somehow eclipse the production that's happening in Sonora and the organization around this really historic and cultural phenomena that's been going on for so many hundreds, if not thousands of years in Mexico. And so I do think about that when we have so many, wonderful agroecologists in California, all over the United States and Texas who reach out and say, we really want to invest in growing a ton of agave. It's drought tolerant. If there isn't water to put on it, the plant won't die right away. Like there's so many cool benefits. But I think it's such an amazing larger conversation to have around what like a brand, American produced brand would mean. And yeah, I mean, you probably have a better idea than anyone with your work, Doug, but it is something I think about where I'm like, I would hate for that to eclipse the production and the history and the economy in Mexico, where no one's really heard of Baccanora. Like regionally we have, but if you talk to most people, people are just finding out about mezcal, and even that is like pretty niche. So I would just want to be careful to really support the Mexican producers, but I also think everyone should grow the plant. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much to all three of you for your time tonight. Thanks for the great presentations, and thanks for the work that you all are doing. Please join us for tomorrow night's tasting. We will have Pedro Jimenez and Monica Leva speaking about the Mezonte Mezcal project, which is also a conservation project and a social project indeed, in the context of what's happening in Jalisco. So we'll move further south tomorrow and talk about some complementary issues there. To do that, please register on the Tumamoc, Arizona Agave Series website, same website you used to register for this one. And just to remind you that recordings of the previous presentations and tastings can be found on the website as well.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, everyone. Thanks.
Thank
Thank you so much.
We hope to see you tomorrow and hope to see you guys down in Mexico soon.
Yes.
Come
Thank
visit.
you.
All right.
Bye-bye.